In this video, we're looking at UFC Vegas 99. I'm going to give you my full card predictions. We'll start from the top of the card all the way down, so make sure you watch until the end. And as always, you can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. In the main event, we have Michel Pereira fighting Anthony Hernandez. This is one of the best fights the UFC could make in the middleweight division, and we get 5 rounds of it. Fluffy Hernandez is possibly the most frustrating guy on the roster to compete against because he's going to make you work. We don't see fighters in the higher weight divisions putting on such a grueling pace like we see from Anthony Hernandez. He's shooting for takedowns nonstop. He's forcing guys to constantly defend these takedowns, and that's tiring in its own right, but that's not where it gets fatiguing. Where the real fatigue sets in is when he gets the takedown. That's when it starts to get exhausting. And that's a problem that a lot of fans have with wrestlers in MMA, is they get the fight to the mat and they kind of just sit there. They'll spend minutes laying in guard, little light shots, body, head, just doing enough when the ref says to work to keep the position. Fluffy Hernandez isn't really doing that. That's where we see him separate himself, because when he is getting the takedowns, he's wrapping his arms around the neck immediately, rocking guys back and forth, challenging their balance when they're on all fours or when they're in turtle. And he's doing this while threatening choke after choke, and he does a great job. I think this is a super underrated part of his game. He does a great job of letting go, knowing when to let go. How often do we see guys look for guillotines, for example, and they're cranking on it, they're squeezing for 30, 40 seconds at a time. They lose the grip, they re-grip, they squeeze again, and ultimately end up in a bad position and lose the choke. It happens all the time, but we see from Fluffy, he's looking for that arm-in guillotine all the time. He's on somebody's back, jumps over off to the side to get that arm-in guillotine, quickly realizes whether if it's on the blood or not. If it's not, he lets go, gets back on top, lands some strikes, and then jumps right back into that position and tries again. But he doesn't sit there wrenching on shit over and over again, hoping that the guy's gonna tap. We saw how good he looked on the mat against Adolfo Vieira, just kind of outlasted Vieira, out-scrambled him, was able to get on top of him when he was tired and ultimately submit him. And I picked against him last time out against Roman Kopylov, because if you've watched the channel before, you know I'm a big Roman Kopylov kind of guy. I thought Kopylov, being the better striker, was just gonna get him out of there, knock him out in the second round like he does to most of his opponents, work the body. We've seen Fluffy hurt to the body before, but he didn't look completely outmatched on the feet. But once he got the fight down to the mat where he wanted, it was over. As for the other side of the matchup, if you go through the history of this channel, you know I have never picked against Michel Pereira in my life. And his only real loss in the UFC was against Tristan Connolly in his second fight in the promotion, where he gassed out because he was literally flipping around in the octagon. Not counting the Diego Lopez DQ, right? So apart from that, the dude is a winner, and he's probably the most athletic guy in the division, power in both hands, good kicks. He's yet to be out grappled outside of that Tristan Connolly fight, and he's coming off of 3 first-round finishes, and he might be a bad matchup for Hernandez because he is so physically strong. He's hard to get to the ground. He does a good job of keeping his feet. I would give him the striking edge here. He does a really good job of skirting around the outside, drawing guys into his power. But even with all that, the problem is, yes, you can defend one takedown or a couple of half-hearted takedowns here and there from Santiago Ponzinibbio, but what happens when you got to defend 20? What happens in the 4th round when this guy's still coming at you with everything and we've seen you gas inside of 3 rounds before? That's what really gives me pause, and that's why I have to go against them for the first time this week and get back on the Fluffy Hernandez train, because I think that Hernandez just puts a pace on him like he's never seen before. Path to victory for Pereira is to catch him in a submission early while he's dry, while he's fresh, while he's strong. But if he doesn't do that, I don't see a man on the roster being able to beat Fluffy if he is at the cardio edge. Like, if they're fighting and the guy in front of him starts to fatigue a little bit, I don't think anybody at 185 is keeping up with him. So give me the weaponized cardio at 185 pounds. It's pretty scary, but I think it leads to another win for Fluffy Hernandez this week. Give me Anthony Hernandez to win this fight by submission. Next, we have a fight between Rob Font and Kyler Phillips. Very tough fight for Rob Font, which sounds like every Rob Font fight, because there's no way this guy has said no when the UFC has offered him an opponent. When you look at his resume, it's just ridiculous. Look at his last 10. Prime Rafael Sunsao, Sergio Pettis, who went on to win championships in Bellator, Ricky Simone, who's a tough fight for anybody, Officer Magic Marlon Moraes, Cody No Love, former champ, Jose Aldo, former champ, Chito over 5 rounds, Adrian Yanez, tough fight for anybody, although Rob made it look like it wasn't so tough, so big respect. But after that, Corey Sandhagen over 5 rounds, Davison Figueiredo, former champion. I just wanted to start this piece off by acknowledging how much of a savage this guy is, because half of the names on those lists, most guys would have probably said no to, but Rob Font's a G. But regardless of that, this is still a tough fight for him. You got Kyler Phillips coming off of that win over Pedro Munoz, where the man looked like he was moving in 1.5x speed. Looked like the fastest fighter on the roster, touching up Pedro for all 3 rounds, and that's what makes it tough here for Rob Font, because you got Kyler Phillips, who has leaned on his grappling in the past. Throughout his UFC run, he's taking guys down with his awesome wrestling, landing that heavy ground and pound, and he could always strike, but in his last fight he showed that's where he's really leveled up. Clearly a part of his game he's been working really hard on. You got Rob Font, who has struggled with takedown defense, struggled to get back up to his feet in recent fights. And Kyler Phillips, we know, can not only put him there, but now we know that he can probably outstrike Rob Font with that speed advantage. So I think that wherever this fight goes, Font's in trouble. Respect to the man. He's been doing it for a long time, but I think he's outgunned here. So give me the younger fighter with more tools in the tool bag. Give me Kyler Phillips to win this fight by decision. And real quick, before the next fight, if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. Next, we're looking at Sumudaerji fighting Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson has arrived, ladies and gentlemen. I was called a madman for picking him against Joshua Van, and sure enough, knocks Van out as a dog. Now he's a favorite, which makes sense because he hasn't been getting a whole lot of respect from the books lately, and you got Sumudaerji, who's a striker. He wants to stand and bang. And I've said this on camera many times, so many times that if you've watched for a while, you're probably tired of hearing it. Charles Johnson has yet to be outstruck in the UFC. In fights that he's lost, it's because he's been taken down or controlled for majority of the round, giving up clutch takedowns at bad points in the round, like against Ode Osborne in the 3rd, but he hasn't been outstruck, and that's why we continue to pick him in these fights. And he's been the underdog again in his last 3 fights, but this is free real estate, even at -200. Sumudaerji's going to let his hands go. He's going to look for the big shot, look for the knockout. Charles Johnson, though, does a great job defensively. The vision is on point. He sees everything coming his way. Even if he does get rocked, he shakes it off very quickly. And like some of the guys that he's beaten recently, I think he's just going to punish the mistakes of the younger fighter here. Great counter striking, as you know. He knows how to pull guys into punching range. And the tricky part about Charles Johnson's game is that he spends a lot of time pulling guys in, retreating, using footwork, using head movement, and he does it over and over and over again. Move backward, draw guys in, look for the counter shots to the point where it becomes rhythmic, and that's where he gets guys, because then they start to fall into that pattern, and then when he decides to be first, they don't expect that he gets to jump on him. We saw him do that against Joshua Van. We saw him do that against Azat Maksum, who I was told was going to beat Charles Johnson with ease. Charles Johnson's no good, and then Charles Johnson tunes him up for 3 rounds. So super smart approach from him on the feet. I think he cruises here. I think he's levels above Sumudaerji on the feet, and if this fight does hit the mat, it's because Charles Johnson put him there. So I think he closes the show late. I think he breaks him down, knocks him out sometime in the 3rd. Give me Charles Johnson. Give me the energy by knockout. Next on the screen, you'll see Brady Heastand in there with Jake Hadley. Not the case anymore. Heastand pulls out, which hurts so bad because Jake Hadley was easily the best underdog of the week, and now he's going to be the best favorite of the week against Cam Smotherman. UFC debut for Smotherman. Jake Hadley, being at bantamweight, is finally found a home. This is where he should be fighting. Looked excellent last time out. Had all this stuff. Had all these reasons why he was going to beat Brady Heastand. If that fight gets rebooked, we're all over it. But give me Jake Hadley to win this week. Give me Jake Hadley, I would assume, by submission. And if you want the official betting article of the week, that'll be on KunithMMA.com. We've got a few closely lined fights here. Jake Hadley was the one that I wanted, though. I wanted him to be on the official betting article this week, and I don't really know what the odds are at the time of recording this on him. He might still be. But later in the card, with some of those women's MMA fights, that's where the money will be made on the official betting article this week. But you can get that on KunithMMA.com, linked in the description and in a pinned comment, as well as DFS tools like the data model, projections, optimizer, things like that. The community parlay smashed to pieces last week. Very good job by everybody involved. Again, that'll be linked in the description and in a pinned comment. Back to the breakdown. Next, we're looking at Darren Elkins fighting Daniel Pineda this week. Vets going at it, good matchmaking, very powerful, very dangerous is Daniel Pineda. And the ever durable, the damage, Darren Elkins on the other side. Now, from a betting perspective, it would make sense to have two-way action on this. If you were to take, say, Darren Elkins by decision, Daniel Pineda inside the distance, and that's because Elkins is a grinder, he's gonna wrestle. Pineda has lost every fight that he's had that's gone the distance. And we've seen him taken down and controlled before, and we've seen him gas hard before. Now, uncharacteristically, he did win the last round in his last fight, but he lost that fight against Nathaniel Wood because of the work that Wood did in the first and second round. But he does tend to fade as the fight goes on, and my guess is he still had some gas in the tank once Wood started to slow down and he wasn't really pressing the issue with his wrestling. And for Darren Elkins, he may be over the hill, he may be a bit too old, he may be at a huge speed disadvantage, striking defense isn't great. I could see Pineda landing hard over the guard, putting him out early in this fight, but if he doesn't have that, we've seen this movie before. The damage doesn't stop. Like when Darren Elkins passes away and gets reincarnated, he's going to come back as a pair of work boots. And he's going to keep moving forward, he's going to keep fighting for every position, he's going to win most of the scrambles, I would assume, and in the last round, he's going to make that feel like the longest 5 minutes of your damn life. So because of that, I have to go Darren Elkins. We know that cardio is king. Elkins has built a career on just wanting it more than the other guy, and Daniel Pineda, again, has lost every decision he's ever been faced with. So give me Darren Elkins to win this week. I think he wins on the scorecards, just does more activity, stays on top, looks for takedowns. Give me the damage. Give me the damage by decision. Next, we have a fight between Matheus Nicolau. He's fighting Asu Almabayev this week. This game is unforgiving. Harsh game we play, and we love flyweights, right? The toughest division in the game because that's where the best fighters are competing. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. And because of that, it's not really the weight class where you want to be losing fights consistently, because there is some guy somewhere in a country that ends in Stan who's looking to make it to the UFC and is coming to take your spot, and that's literally where Nicolau finds himself this week. Riding a 2-fight losing streak, coming off of back-to-back knockout losses against a fighter from Kazakhstan who's riding a 16-fight winning streak and fights at a relentless pace, throws a lot of overhand rights while he's shooting for takedowns. And I think it's just going to be one-way traffic for Asu Almabayev the way that it has been throughout his UFC career. Big step up in competition, of course, and he might get pushed a little bit, maybe, but I doubt it. I think that he's just going to be all over Matheus Nicolau this week. Might have to fight off like a guillotine attempt here and there, but outside of that, I don't think we have too much to worry about for Asu this week. And we tend to measure fighters by the level of competition, which makes sense when it comes to losses, but maybe not so much for wins. This fight had me thinking about that specifically. So we'll look at Dricus du Plessis, for example. Du Plessis goes out there, knocks out Trevin Giles in his second UFC fight. No one looked at that win and thought, that guy's going to be the middleweight champion of the world. But if you said that, you would have been right. But beating a Trevin Giles doesn't make you championship caliber. At least that's how it feels until later when you realize that you were watching greatness the whole time, you just didn't realize it. And that's how I feel about Asu Almabayev. I feel like he can beat everybody at 125 pounds. Hasn't lost a round in the UFC yet, hasn't really taken any kind of damage. He is who we thought Khamzat Chimaev is. He's the boogeyman at flyweight. He hasn't lost a fight in over 7 years. Real deal. Minus 185 at the time of recording this. Looks like a goddamn steal. That's how I feel. Give me Asu Almabayev to win this fight by decision. Next, we have a fight between Brad Katona and Gene Matsumoto. I wanted so badly to take the underdog here. We watched Matsumoto give up takedowns on the Contender Series. We watched Dan Argueta take him down over and over and over again. Argueta was winning the fight. He was in control until Matsumoto found a guillotine. And think about Dan Argueta, he fights at a crazy high pace, but we also watched him just slow down last week. We watched him slow down a little bit in the Matsumoto fight as well. So I don't think that Matsumoto's takedown defense or defensive wrestling is all that great. And I think that Brad Katona's got much higher fight IQ than somebody like Dan Argueta. The problem is Brad Katona doesn't do a whole lot to win rounds that are close. That fight that he's coming off of against Jesse Butler, I don't care at all. This guy was a massive favorite, goes the distance with a guy that Jim Miller packed up in 20 seconds. That doesn't jump off the page to me. You look at his fight before that against Garrett Armfield. He's getting takedowns, but when they're on the feet, Armfield's touching him up. When you got the kind of Muay Thai that Matsumoto has, plus just the raw athleticism, like his ability to get back up to his feet, I think that's what gives Katona problems. Brad Katona's not a finisher. He's a decision machine. The UFC has all the incentive in the world to make sure that this kid gets the rub if things get a little bit dicey on the scorecards. It happens, right? So Matsumoto's going to win this fight. I don't think he finishes Brad Katona because Brad Katona is historically very durable, very tough, but Matsumoto wins on the scorecards. Give me the Brazilian by decision. And we've reached a point on the fight card now where we're looking at one side, at least, of these matchups probably doesn't belong in the promotion. The UFC is supposed to be for the best fighters in the world, and if we look at a handful of these next fights, these are clearly not the best fighters in the world. Joselyne Edwards fighting Tamires Vidal. Rough time has Joselyne Edwards had in the UFC lately, but Tamires Vidal does not look like a UFC fighter at all. I don't think she wins any more fights in the promotion because she doesn't wrestle. 28% takedown defense, negative striking differential. Her only win is against Ramona Pascal, who's currently 6-6 and went 0-3 in the UFC. Joselyne Edwards has won fights at the UFC level. She can wrestle. She's fighting out of a decent gym, the rightful favorite here. I think she does everything that Tamires Vidal does at a higher level. So easy matchup. She should be the favorite. If she wasn't the favorite, I'd be writing a letter to the president saying, hey, let's take all the national debt that we have, go ahead and put it on Joselyne Edwards so that we can get the country out of this hole. Kunith 2028. But Joselyne Edwards, clean sweep on the judges' scorecards, cruises to a decision win this week. Give me Joselyne Edwards by decision. Jessica Penne versus Elise Reed. Same thing with the last fight. I don't think that we're looking at the best of the best right now. And if this was a young Jessica Penne, I'd be all over her this week. Because of the strong wrestling, Elise Reed has struggled mightily with takedown defense and getting back up to her feet. But at 41 years old, no more juice. She's not going to go out there and out wrestle Elise Reed for 15 minutes. And I could see Elise Reed still improving, still leveling out, rounding out that skill set at 31 years old, working on the anti-wrestling part of her game, which is really the only thing that's been losing her these fights lately. While Jessica Penne is just trying to get a couple of more fights in at this point. I don't know if she has publicly said that this is her last fight. I haven't looked into it. I don't care. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in the comments did come around and say, oh, it is going to be her last fight, right? So Elise Reed has the advantage in the striking. That's where she's separating in these fights, landing more strikes, creating bigger moments, winning rounds in this one because of it. I think Elise Reed wins. I think she wins on the scorecards. Give me Elise Reed by decision. Again, what are we doing here? Alice Ardelean, she's fighting Melissa Martinez this week. Melissa Martinez dropped her UFC debut to Elise Reed. Didn't look her best, and you can imagine a lot of that has to do with her being young, inexperienced, making her UFC debut. Had moments in that fight though, was not completely destroyed, ended up winning the second round despite being dropped in the first. So a decent resolve being shown on the Melissa Martinez side. Good learning experience as well. Now that fight was a while ago. Again, she was 25 in that fight. She's 27 now. But if she's made any improvements between now and then, and I'm assuming she has, then she should get the win here. Ardelean dropped her UFC debut to Shauna Bannon, stepped in on short notice. Short notice fighters typically don't win. But it's Shauna Bannon. And it was a competitive fight, but she ended up losing, and Bannon has not looked good in the UFC, and she was getting touched up by her, right? So I think Melissa Martinez is going to go out there, look good, get takedowns, and overall just do more, look a bit sharper, look a bit faster, maintain a higher level of activity, and win on the scorecards. So the pick for me in this fight will be Melissa Martinez by decision. And lastly, we have a fight between Robelis Despaigne fighting Austen Lane. I want to pick against Despaigne again so bad because he's not Superman. I know people tried to tell me last time about, oh, this guy's the best. I tried to warn you against Salsa Boy. The guy's skill set is very limited. He hasn't fought anyone. You go back and watch those first 4 fights in his career. I've said this before. They just looked for the tallest dude in the crowd and said, hey, you want to make a couple bucks? The guy's not very good. Striking, he's got the credentials, the taekwondo, what have you. Doesn't translate into MMA as well as you would think. Against Josh Parisian was swinging wild, looked like a sloppy mess, and he just beat a guy who probably isn't UFC caliber. But hopefully, the last fight that he had was a bit of a wake-up call. Salsa Boy just mauled him, took him down whenever he wanted, stayed on top. Robelis Despaigne did very little to get back up to his feet. Looked like he didn't know what was going on when he was on the mat, and I don't think at 36 years old he's getting all that much better. And Austen Lane, definitely more athletic. This is a guy who played in the NFL. He's way more athletic than Robelis Despaigne. I don't care about his body, right? You guys in the comments talk about how, oh, look how jacked he is. I don't care. Austen Lane's a better athlete. Austen Lane could take him down with ease. But I don't think he's going to be able to take any of the shots that come back his way because Despaigne just has to touch him and he's going to fall. And again, we just touched on that wrestling background. We saw how hard he gassed against Yonata Denise not too long ago. And that's the thing, man. You can play football. Playing football is hard. Playing in the National Football League is super difficult. It's way harder to get to the NFL than it is to get to the UFC. But you got to think what that is like, right? It's explosion, short bursts. You play for 4 to 12 seconds on a given play. And then there's 30 to 40 seconds in between in a lot of the cases, right? And he's a pass rusher, right? The guy's just going to rush the quarterback. He doesn't get there. Okay. He's not a corner running up and down the field with the fastest player on the other side of the ball. It's not happening. So I think that Lane is very good in spurts. If rounds were like 2 minutes, he'd probably be very good at MMA, but that's not the case. Robelis Despaigne, for what it's worth, he was getting taken down a lot, had Salsa Boy sitting on top of him, making him work, making him carry his weight. But you can tell the power was still there, like late in the second and in the third round. So I think that if he is able to escape the first round here, or if he's able to keep his feet in the first round, he's going to knock Austen laying out. I know I'm not giving you a groundbreaking pick here, but I do think that we see Robelis Despaigne live another day. He'll win this week, but just wait when they match him up with like a junior Tafa. No, he wins that fight too. But when he gets matched up with like a Mick Parkin, that's when he's toast. But for now, he wins Robelis Despaigne by knockout. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, and I'll see you later in the week for final picks. Let's go.